The cows were uneasy that night. They shifted in their stalls with heavy breaths and slow, suspicious eyes, lowing just enough to pull Thomas Callahan from a shallow, dreamless sleep. He sat upright in the old iron-framed bed, the rifle already in his hands. Out here, you didn't wait to ask questions. Wind scraped dry leaves across the wooden porch. The night air smelled of dust and cedar smoke. He held his breath, listening. 3 knocks. Not loud, not panicked, just deliberate. Thomas frowned. No one came to the ranch. Not anymore. Not since the war ended. Not since the land dried up and the railroad skipped his valley by 20 miles. Not since Eliza died in the winter of '62 and he buried her under the cottonwood. He hadn't touched a woman since. Hadn't spoken to one in over 2 decades. 3 more knocks. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed, boots already on, and lit the lantern. The flame flickered, painting the log walls with nervous shadows. His heart pounded. Not with fear, exactly. With something older than that. Something he'd forgotten how to name. When he opened the door, he found a woman standing there barefoot. She was wrapped in a threadbare army blanket, long black hair hanging in tangled ropes past her shoulders, skin like river clay, eyes like thunderclouds. The lantern light made her look carved from some half-remembered story. "I ain't lost," she said before he could speak, "and I don't need your charity." Thomas grunted. Most people knock because they need something. "I need cows," she replied flatly. "Milk cows. Yours are still alive. That means they're clean." He blinked, taken aback by the bluntness. "You want to buy milk?" She didn't answer, just looked past him into the dark house, toward the stove, the rocking chair, the coat still hanging by the door like someone might return for it. Then her eyes settled back on him, and he felt something shift in his chest. Something small and buried, shaking loose. "No one sent you?" he asked. She shook her head. "I wasn't sent." And for some reason, that scared him more than if she had been. Her name, he would later learn, was Satanya, which meant echo in her people's tongue. But that night, she said nothing more. She didn't flinch when he pointed toward the barn, didn't argue when he warned her not to spook the bull, just lifted her chin and walked into the dark with the quiet confidence of someone who'd slept outside more nights than in. He followed, lantern swinging, silence stretching long between them like a taut fence wire. The barn creaked with wind and age. Inside, the air was thick with hay dust and warm animal breath. The cows lowed, uncertain, but not alarmed. She approached them like she knew them. He watched, leaning against a post, still holding the rifle. Not aiming it, not exactly, but not setting it down either. She reached beneath the first cow, pressed her head to the flank, and closed her eyes. "Always listen to their breathing," she said softly. "If it slows, they trust you." Thomas said nothing. The way her fingers worked, slow, patient, reminded him of how Eliza used to braid her hair on Sunday mornings, with quiet reverence, like each strand mattered. That memory hurt more than he expected. After an hour, she left the milk in the tin pail on the steps and started walking. "Wait," he called after her. "You got a place to sleep?" She didn't turn around, just kept walking. The moon lit her silhouette in silver. Long legs, bare shoulders, a quiet defiance in every step. It stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years. Not desire, but a deep, aching awareness of another soul. As if the world had widened suddenly. As if his ranch was no longer enough to fill the sky. He stayed up till morning, the untouched milk still sweating on the porch rail. The next night, she came back. No knock this time. Just the sound of a tin cup placed gently on the porch, and her voice behind the screen door. "You got oats?" He stood in the kitchen, stunned, holding a can of beans like a fool. "You cooking?" she asked, peering in. "I wasn't." "Then you better start. I brought milk." By the end of the week, she was there every evening, always just after dusk, always without asking, always with some unexpected request: eggs, salt, a whetstone, a clean rag for wrapping something she wouldn't explain. She never offered thanks, never gave explanations. But every time she walked through his field in the low light, something in him snapped to attention. Not with alarm, but with hunger. The kind that made you notice your own loneliness. The kind that crept into your bones and whispered that maybe, just maybe, not everything was done yet. One evening, as the air thickened with approaching rain, he asked the question that had been burning through him all week. Why here? She didn't answer right away. They were sitting on the porch, each with their own cup of chicory brew, neither looking at the other. Her long legs were curled beneath her. One hand held the cup, the other toyed absently with a piece of braided string she wore around her wrist. "Because they think I'm dead," she said at last. He turned sharply. "Who?" "Everyone." She didn't elaborate. The wind picked up. A distant rumble echoed over the hills. He watched her face in the lantern light, the strength behind it, the weathered calm. She didn't look afraid, just untethered. "You on the run?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not running, just done being chased." And then, without looking at him, she added, "I know what it's like to bury someone under a cottonwood." After that, she stopped knocking entirely. She came and went like the wind, like a ghost that had chosen to linger. Sometimes she would disappear for a day or two, then return as if no time had passed, dragging a satchel of wild herbs or a pocket knife in need of sharpening. She never offered stories, but every now and then she'd glance at him like she was waiting for him to ask. He never did, not directly, but he watched her. The way she touched animals, the way she never turned her back to the woods, the way her eyes scanned the horizon when a hawk circled too low. She was hiding from something or someone, and he was starting to care more than he should. One night, he found her staring at Eliza's grave. The fire had died down, and the sky was full of stars. He thought Satanya had already left. But there she was, standing barefoot in the moonlight, her arms folded tight across her chest. "I didn't mean to intrude," she said softly. He shook his head. "Ain't intruding. She would have liked you." A long pause. Then she turned to him, and her voice broke in a way he hadn't heard before. "I can't stay much longer." His throat tightened. "Why not?" She met his eyes, and in that moment, that single, held breath, he saw everything she wasn't saying. The past, the scars, the fire behind her calm, and something else, too. Regret. "I left something behind," she whispered. He took a step forward, and then a rifle cracked in the distance. They both dropped low, instinct taking over. The cattle bawled in the dark. Something moved near the fence line. She stood slowly, her silhouette sharp against the stars, and for the first time he saw her face not just calm, but ready. "I have to go," she said. He reached out, grabbed her wrist. "You're not alone anymore." But her eyes told him it wasn't that simple. And before he could speak again, she vanished into the dark, swallowed by the woods without another word. The first thing Thomas noticed was the silence. Not the natural kind, not the quiet of empty hills or late-night wind. This silence had teeth. It gripped the barn and the woods and the space between his ribs, the kind of silence that came after a warning shot, and before something worse. He searched the fence line till dawn. No tracks, no blood, no sign of her, except for one thing: her old army blanket, folded neatly on the foot of his bed. Still damp with dew, still carrying the faint scent of pine and smoke. She had been inside his home. Inside. After all that distance, all that restraint, all those weeks of wordless understanding, she'd crossed that final line and left without a sound. He stood at the doorway for a long time, the shawl heavy in his hands. A single black thread had come loose near the corner, fluttering like a flag in the morning breeze. She left it for him to find. But why? Was it a goodbye or a promise? 3 days passed. The cows were restless. The chickens wouldn't roost right. The wind came from the wrong direction, carrying the sharp scent of creosote and gun oil. He cleaned his rifle twice that week, though it didn't need it. He didn't sleep. Didn't eat much either. Each evening, he sat on the porch watching the trail where she used to appear, a shadow moving across the tall grass, her hair catching the last orange light. But the trail stayed empty. No footprints, no voice, no soft knock at the door, only the old blanket on his bed, folded the same way she folded the milk cloths in the barn. Only that. And the thought of what she might have left behind in the dark. Then, on the 4th night, someone else came. A rider. Not Apache. Not someone from the nearby township either. He rode tall in the saddle like someone who hadn't worked a real job in months. Spurs that jingled louder than they needed to. A coat too clean for this part of the West. Thomas met him halfway to the fence, rifle resting across his arm like a question with only one answer. "Evening," the stranger said. "Don't think it is." The rider smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. Just passing through. Looking for someone. Thomas said nothing. "Woman," the man added. "Half-breed. Scar on her right temple. Stole something that don't belong to her." "What was it?" Thomas asked, low and flat. "Not yours to know." Thomas shifted the rifle slightly. "Then you're done here." The man's eyes narrowed. "She come through?" Thomas stared at him, long and hard. Said nothing. After a tense pause, the rider nodded, almost as if he understood something unspoken. Then he pulled the reins and turned back down the trail, but not before adding, "You get tired of playing guard dog, old man. I'll be at the ridge till Sunday. After that, I stop being polite." That night, Thomas pulled the rocking chair into the barn, slept there with the cows, rifle across his knees, blanket over his shoulders, eyes fixed on the shadows between the boards. He found the note on the 6th morning, scratched into the dirt behind the water trough. Faint, but deliberate. "Don't follow, but don't forget." There was no signature, but he didn't need one. Satanya was still alive, and she didn't want him coming after her. But what she wanted didn't matter anymore. He packed the mule with 2 days of feed, the rifle, and Eliza's old canteen. Saddle worn, boots oiled, mind set. He wasn't young anymore, wasn't quick, but he knew how to track. He'd hunted coyotes and cougars in these hills for half a lifetime. Now he hunted something more dangerous. A man who smiled without warmth and gave Sunday as a deadline. The ridge was 10 miles out, a scar of rock and scrub pine overlooking the old rail line. The kind of place you passed through fast if you had sense, or camped in if you were waiting for something that didn't want to be found. He reached it at dusk. No smoke, no voices, but he found their prints, 2 horses, one heavier, the other light and fast, both fresh, hours old. He followed them into a ravine where the air turned cold even in summer, and the rocks echoed every breath like a whisper. Then he heard it. A cough. Muffled. Human. He dropped to one knee behind a ridge of basalt and peered over. Two men sat at a dying fire. The rider from earlier was there, unmistakable, the same wide-brimmed hat and too clean coat. But the second man was the surprise. Older. Thick beard. Pale skin sunburned deep red. A thin scar across his lip, and one arm wrapped in bandages, and between them, tied to a cedar post. Satanya. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. She was bruised, but alert. Her ankles were bound, but her shoulders remained square, like a hawk watching from a limb. Her mouth was gagged, but her eyes burned with defiance, and when she saw him, crouched above them in the rocks, her gaze didn't soften. It hardened. She shook her head once. Don't. But it was too late. Because the rider stood up suddenly, scanned the ridge with eyes like glass, and called out, "You brought him, didn't you?" His voice echoed, "You always leave some fool behind to clean up your messes." Thomas gritted his teeth, raised the rifle. Then the second man stood too, and pulled a knife. Thomas had a shot. One clean shot. But not enough for both. And if he missed, Satanya's eyes locked with his. No fear. Just trust. He fired. The knife man dropped instantly, the blade falling harmless to the dirt. The rider dove behind a log, yelling curses. Thomas scrambled down the slope, heart hammering, not young enough to move like this anymore, but moving anyway. The air rang with gunfire. Dust leapt from the stones. One bullet grazed his sleeve. Then silence. He reached her, knelt, cut the rope with shaking hands. Her wrists were raw, but she didn't wince. Didn't look surprised to see him, only said, "You weren't supposed to follow." And he whispered, "I never stopped." A shot cracked behind them. Thomas twisted. Pain blossomed in his side. He dropped to one knee. She caught him. One arm over her shoulder, dragging him backward into the gully, steps swift and sure. Bullets bit at the rocks. She ducked into a crevice just wide enough for two, covered the entrance with a fallen branch, held him close while he pressed his hand to the wound, not deep, but bleeding. And when he looked at her, really looked, he saw tears in her eyes she hadn't meant for anyone to see. "I told you not to come." He smiled weakly. "You left your shawl." She laughed. One short, broken breath. Then grew quiet. Their faces inches apart. The world around them faded. Only the sound of her heartbeat against his, and the taste of dust, and the trembling breath they shared in the dark. Outside, footsteps crunched through the brush. The rider was hunting them now, and Satanya whispered, "He's not after what I stole. He's after who I am." Thomas was drifting. The pain wasn't sharp anymore. It had turned dull and cold, like river stones pressed against his ribs. His shirt was soaked, and he could feel her hand, small but steady, pressed tight over the wound, trying to hold back time. He was lying half on her lap, hidden in the rocky crevice behind that fallen branch. The desert night pressed close around them. Outside, the world was hunting. But inside that hollow, time had slowed to breath and silence. "You still awake?" she whispered. He nodded, or thought he did. A pause. Then, softer. "You shouldn't have come." "Didn't know how not to," he murmured. "That's the trouble with getting old. You stop making smart choices. You just follow what matters." She didn't answer right away. Then he felt her fingers move gently across his temple, brushing away sweat, or maybe just reminding herself he was still there. "You always listen before you speak," she said, almost like it hurt to admit. "That's rare." Thomas managed a crooked smile. "You talk more when you're scared." That made her laugh. Just once. But there was something brittle in it. He tried to lift his head. "Who is he?" Her body tensed beneath him. "You said he wasn't after what you stole. You said it was who you are." She looked away, out toward the firelight flickering through the narrow gap. Then, in a voice that didn't belong to the desert, or to this time at all, she whispered, "My name is not Satanya. Not really." She had been born on a riverbank with no name, somewhere between the borderlands and the old Spanish missions, in a village burned twice before she was old enough to remember the scent of her mother's skin. Her father was a scout, half Apache, half something else, a man who could walk between worlds and never belong to either. He taught her how to ride without a saddle, how to read animal tracks, and how to disappear into wind and shadow. But he died when she was 12, shot in the back while teaching her to set snares. She buried him with her hands. Then she walked west, always west, until she found the fort. The man they called Captain Mallory took her in, fed her, clothed her, let her work in the stables, but nothing came without a price. She learned that too late. When she tried to leave, he branded her, a mark beneath her collarbone, something she never let Thomas see. It wasn't love. It wasn't even hate. It was ownership. And when she ran, he sent men to fetch her. Everywhere she went, they followed, until she stopped being a girl and started becoming something else. A whisper, a ghost, a name people muttered in mining towns and river camps. The woman with storm eyes and a rifle made of bone. She robbed soldiers, burned down outposts, freed those still in chains. Not out of rage, but out of memory. She said her father's spirit moved through her hands when she lit a match. That vengeance had a voice. That survival wasn't enough if you left others behind. But she never stopped looking over her shoulder. Not until Thomas. In the dark, he reached for her hand. He found it, resting near his ribs. Held it. No words, just warmth. And for a long time, they didn't speak. Then, she whispered, "My real name is Asa," the Apache word for sunrise. Thomas held that name like a promise. When morning came, they crawled out into the pale blue light. No fire, no horses, no sound but the cicadas and the wind. The men were gone, and they'd left a message, carved into the tree just above where she'd been tied. "This ends in Carson." Thomas knew the town, 20 miles southeast, a mining camp that pretended to be a settlement, full of gamblers, drifters, and men with secrets to bury. And apparently, one more reckoning. They moved slowly. Thomas insisted he could ride. Asa didn't believe him, but helped him mount anyway. She found a horse. His old mule had been chased off, but she coaxed a pale roan back to the ridge. A wild thing, not fully broken, but it followed her like it had no choice. Just like him. Every mile felt longer. The wound pulsed. The sun burned. But he kept looking over at her. Not because he doubted she'd stay, but because he didn't want to miss a single second of her riding through the dust like something mythic, like a ghost you only saw once in a lifetime. They reached Carson at dusk. It wasn't much of a town, a single muddy street, a saloon that doubled as a jail, and a church whose steeple had been struck by lightning twice. Asa tied the horse outside the general store, left the rifle in the saddle. She was going in unarmed. Thomas frowned. "You sure?" She nodded. "He's not here to kill me." "Then what?" "He wants the story to end with me crawling, or begging, or running again." "And if it ends differently?" She met his gaze, calm, final. "Then I stop running." They stepped into the saloon. It was quiet. Half a dozen men, a bartender too drunk to care, and a piano that hadn't been tuned in years. Mallory was at the corner table. He didn't look up, didn't blink, just sipped his drink. and gestured to the chair across from him. Asa sat, Thomas stood behind her, one hand at his side. Near his knife, Mallory spoke first. "Didn't expect you to bring company." Asa said nothing. "Then again," Mallory mused, "you always had a way of making men feel needed, right before you left them bleeding." Thomas bristled. "She didn't leave me." Mallory laughed. "Then you don't know her yet." Then he leaned forward, and in that moment, in the breath before anyone moved, everything changed. Because Asa stood up slowly, stepped forward, and whispered something only Mallory could hear. His face went pale. He opened his mouth, and she slapped a folded paper on the table. An old letter, sealed with wax. Thomas didn't know where she'd gotten it, but Mallory did. His hand trembled, and for the first time, he looked afraid. They walked out, without another word. No one followed, not even Mallory. Back in the street, Thomas finally asked, "What did you give him?" Asa didn't look back. His daughter's handwriting, she ran away too. "I found her last year in Montana." Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then, "And you never thought to go back to him with that?" She shook her head. "He never asked about her. Not once. Only about me." They stood there in the orange light, dust curling around their boots, and for the first time Thomas realized they weren't running anymore. Not from bullets, not from memories, not even from themselves. That night, they camped under a grove of sycamores. The fire crackled low. He lay beside her, not touching, not speaking, just listening to her breathe, listening like she once listened to the cows. "Do you miss her?" she asked. "Eliza?" He nodded. "Every day." Asa turned to face him, eyes catching firelight. "She wouldn't mind me being here?" Thomas looked at her a long while, then, simply, "No. She'd want me to watch the sunrise." Asa smiled faintly, and that night, just before dawn, she laid her head on his shoulder. Not as a lover, not even as a friend, but as someone who had finally found a place to rest. But just as sleep took them, the horse screamed, and a voice shouted from the trees, "Drop the gun, Callahan, or she dies this time."